Welcome to a record found inside a field notebook recovered from the rubble of Monte Cassino, Italy, May 1944. The cover was burned. The first page is intact. The handwriting is steady military British Army issue. It reads, "Among the ruins, something still watched us. It had the face of stone, but the eyes seemed wet. There is no name." The entry ends with a single word underlined twice, vigilat. It watches. The notebook was logged under number 17C by the Allied War Correspondence Corps, filed as anonymous testimony. It was transferred to the War Office Archive in 1946 and has remained unclaimed ever since. The ink is consistent with Parker Quink blue-black common among officers stationed in the Italian campaign. The page shows a faint mark where moisture once spread through the margin. Testing in 1982 confirmed it was not blood, not rainwater, but something mineral stone dust mixed with residue of ash. No additional entries were found. The second page is torn. The third is blank. Only on the inside cover, faint pencil script reads, "Saint Benedict keeps watch. The gargoyle does not sleep." There is no further explanation. A duplicate note appears years later in the Vatican Archive Box 412B. A letter addressed to Monsignor Rinaldi from an unnamed chaplain describes a survivor shaken by visions of moving statues at Cassino. The chaplain writes, "He insists he saw eyes that glimmered, though there was no glass, and mouths that had filled with dust." The letter ends with, "I have advised rest." He does not speak now except in Latin. In a local oral recording from Cassino collected in 1957, a woman's voice is heard. She says, "The night the guns stopped, we heard something sighing in the monastery. 3 times. Then nothing." The tape was part of a field survey titled Voices After the War. The collector's report ends abruptly, returned with partial transcripts. Original speaker moved away before follow-up. None of these accounts were ever cross-referenced. The archivist who indexed the box added a small annotation in pencil. Possible folklore interference. Yet every artifact matches the same week: the collapse of the abbey, the silence after the battle, the discovery of unmoving eyes in the rubble. There is no photographic proof. No soldier is known to have spoken publicly of statues that wept or gargoyles that moved. But the records persist. Each one found separately, each one containing the same word, vigilat. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The material that forms the foundation of this record originates from 3 distinct archives: the British War Office Collection, the Vatican's Secret Archive, Section 9, Cassino Reconstruction, and a series of post-war oral history recordings undertaken by the Italian Folklore Documentation Project between 1956 and 1958. Together, these fragments compose what historians now classify as the Cassino fragments. Each piece, military report, ecclesiastical letter, villager's voice, refers to an observation, rumor, or silence surrounding the same site, the Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino, destroyed between February and May 1944 during the second phase of the Italian campaign. The first verified document dates to February 16, 1944, the day after the Allied bombing that leveled the monastery. In the combat report number 427-44, filed by the U.S. 12th Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel John M. Davis noted that the target has ceased to exist as a coherent structure. Attached photographs confirmed total devastation: collapsed walls, obliterated cloisters, fragments of religious sculpture mixed with military debris. There is no mention of survivors. Yet one supplementary note, handwritten in the margin by a translator from the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Division, Captain L. Brenner, records a single line in Latin carved into a remaining arch: dormit vigilans. It sleeps while watching. The phrase was catalogued but not analyzed. The stone fragment bearing the inscription disappeared between the cataloging in 1945 and a later inventory in 1952. A second layer of material emerged from Vatican correspondence. In April 1944, Monsignor Carlo Rinaldi, then attached to the Apostolic Nunciature in Italy, received field letters from local clergy reporting strange persistence of sound within the ruins. One letter, dated April 23rd, reads, "The monastery lies in ruin, yet a low resonance travels through the stones at night. We have ruled out artillery or wind." The cleric adds, "It may be air-trapped within hollow carvings." The Vatican preserved the letters but sealed them under the tag religiosa non definita. They were not released for academic access until 1978. At the same time, Allied reconstruction observers documented local claims that one statue remained upright despite the total collapse. This detail appears in War Office Memorandum 311-B, authored by civilian consultant Dr. Margaret H. Lowell, art historian from the University of London. Her entry reads, A single gargoyle fragment of dark limestone still projects from the northern wall. It appears newly exposed, perhaps by the blast. The record continues. Locals call it the one that stayed awake. Dr. Lowell's notebook, preserved in the Imperial War Museum under Catalog ID 539A, contains a brief annotation beside this line. Possible superstition, no structural reason for survival. Her subsequent field note, dated June 1944, expands the context. It states that on her second visit, the gargoyle face was found in a different orientation. She writes, "I assumed movement by weathering or by human interference. Yet the base was cemented and no sign of force was visible." She concludes with restraint, no explanation satisfactory to engineering logic. From this moment onward, the accounts divide into two distinct domains: factual military documentation and rural oral transmission. The former is consistent, bureaucratic, and silent on anything supernatural. The latter, collected later by Italian field researchers, preserves a very different layer of memory. Among those recordings, one stands out. On May 18, 1957, a fieldworker named Professor Angelo Ferrante visited the small village of Sant'Angelo in Theodis, 6 kilometers from Monte Cassino. There he interviewed an elderly woman identified only as Maria G. In the surviving transcript, one of only 4 pages, she says in dialect, "When the sky opened with fire, the angels left, and only the stone remained to pray." When asked to clarify what she meant by the stone, she replied, "The one on the roof who never blinked." Ferrante's tape was later labeled Cassino Testimony Number 42. The accompanying logbook includes his brief field annotation, "Speaker consistent, no visible confusion." Emotional but coherent. The archive lists his signature, dated May 19, 1957. 2 years later, Ferrante's name disappears from all project rosters. The last administrative entry concerning him states, "Failed to return from a site survey near Cassino 1959, presumed missing." The note beneath it, in a different hand, simply reads, "Same road." To date, his disappearance remains uninvestigated. The collected records were transferred to the Central Folklore Institute in Rome in 1961. There they were catalogued under the section Post-War Rural Traditions, specifically tagged Superstitious Continuity. The working hypothesis of the Institute was that locals projected trauma through religious and animistic imagery. The gargoyle represented survival amidst destruction. Yet several discrepancies persisted. First, independent witnesses within the Allied Engineering Corps confirmed the presence of an anomalous sculpture matching Maria G's description. A 1944 reconstruction map drawn by Polish II Corps lists statue fragment, northern elevation, unknown origin. The entry bears an asterisk and the initials TP. The initials correspond to Captain Tomasz Pawlak, whose private correspondence donated by his family to the Warsaw Military Museum includes a paragraph noting, "There was one face intact among the stones, the others were buried. I remember it because the men refused to pass near it after dusk." Second, a dispatch from the British 78th Infantry Division dated June 5, 1944, reports the discovery of loose debris causing acoustic reverberation, recommending temporary closure of the area. The technical analysis notes intermittent sound emission during wind movement, possibly due to resonance in the hollow walls. Yet the same report ends with the sentence, "Soldiers declined to bivouac in proximity, citing unease." No medical or psychological assessment follows. By 1946, reconstruction teams from the Benedictine order had returned to the site. Records from Abbot Ildefonso Rea document a ritual cleansing and reblessing of the monastery grounds. The abbey ledger, written in Latin, includes one marginal line under May 18th, "Lapidem oculis apertis recondidimus." "We have reburied the stone with open eyes." The translation, verified by Vatican paleographers, is literal. The abbey has never clarified which stone was referenced. In 1949, a U.S. Army historian, Captain Harold Whitby, interviewed surviving personnel of the Allied Reconstruction Unit for an internal report titled Post-Combat Architectural Preservation. The interviews contain references to local unease regarding a watchful figure, but the term watchful is later struck out by an editor. Whitby's draft, rediscovered in 1994, shows faint pencil underlines at these redacted sections. The cross-analysis of all these documents was first attempted in 1975 by Dr. Alessandra Vitale, historian at the University of Florence. Her paper, Ritual Memory and Architectural Survival in Cassino, sought to align oral accounts with structural data. She wrote, "All testimonies traced to a single point, an object perceived as animate, later reburied." Her conclusion remains cautious. Whether myth or metaphor, the persistence of the watcher reflects an unresolved relationship between ruin and witness. Further verification in 1982 by materials expert Dr. Kenneth Hollis confirmed that a recovered limestone fragment from the northern sector showed exposure to intense heat, but retained moisture traces in its surface layer, an anomaly since limestone normally desiccates entirely under combustion. Hollis refrained from speculation. His report ends with moisture of uncertain composition, possibly mineral condensation. These layers, military, ecclesiastical, folkloric, form a consistent geography of uncertainty. Each document acknowledges presence without claiming explanation. The absence of photographic evidence strengthens the paradox. No proof yet, repetition across decades. The pattern recurs in every registry. The same descriptions, the same word, family's eyes awake, watch stone. In 1987, during a private review of declassified War Office files, archivist John E. Morton noted that several casino reports contained unusual gaps. Page 14 of Memorandum 311B was removed. The logbook records page damaged. The missing section, according to index summaries, concerned photographic plates of northern facade ornamentation. No known duplicates exist. Morton's marginal note reads, "The absence itself is a form of testimony." When interviewed for an academic oral history in 1990, Morton recounted his impressions plainly. Everything about Cassino is noise, dust, and stone. Except this. This one thing is silence that persists. He offered no further comment. Today, all known materials related to the Cassino Gargoyle are divided among 3 repositories. The Imperial War Museum, London. Lowell Papers, 53-9A. The Vatican Archive Box, 412B. Correspondence of Monsignor Rinaldi. The Central Folklore Institute. Rome, Cassino. Testimony, number 42. Each archive describes the same object, the same legend, and the same silence. None confirm its existence. In academic summaries, the episode is classified as cultural residue of wartime trauma. Yet within the oral history community, the phrasing differs. The indexers use another term, persistence phenomenon. The gap between those definitions, trauma and persistence, remains the open question. The one unclosed record in the Cassino file is not about the gargoyle, but about the man who listened to its story. The fieldworker who recorded the final testimony in 1957 vanished 2 years later on the same road. That absence has never been annotated. It is listed only as incomplete entry. No further explanation follows. The official war diaries describe Monte Cassino as a tactical point, an elevation, a target, a position of stone to be taken and held. They mention no superstition, no lingering presence. In the 4th Indian Division, war log entry dated 17 May 1944, 22:30 hours. A lieutenant writes, "Smoke still rising from the upper terrace. No movement observed. All units ordered to advance through debris. Visibility poor." The report ends with silence total except wind. A corresponding Allied engineering record filed the following morning lists 32 damaged statues and 4 structural fragments. Among them, a category marked unidentified decorative carving, northern wall. Material limestone. Dimensions 0.9 meters. Status unstable but intact. Under remarks, a short phrase, facing valley expression indeterminate. No further description. Another document, British Army Photographic Section Plate 61-12C, contains a negative of that same wall blurred by dust. The annotation reads, "Exposure failed due to low light. The original plate was misplaced before the cataloging process. These are the facts. Coordinates, measurements, misfiled negatives, unreturned samples. Nothing beyond the language of record-keeping. But outside, the record voices speak differently. In the oral archives of Lazio, recorded 2 decades later, an old man survivor of the bombardment says in Italian, 'The stones had faces. You could not look too long.' When asked to specify, he adds, 'Not saints, not devils. Something in between, waiting.' He describes the night of 18th May 1944, after the German withdrawal before Allied entry. 'We heard a bell ring, though there was no bell. Then a sound like breath through a tunnel.' The interviewer asks if this was wind. He replies, 'No. Wind comes and goes. This stopped and started again like something remembering how to breathe.' Fact layer resumes. The Cassino Archaeological Report of 1947 records acoustic anomalies during reconstruction. Engineer Gianni Moretti suggested pressure differentials within the hollow chambers of the collapsed crypt. His explanation, resonance through fissures. Yet a later footnote contradicts it, stating no hollow structure found in surveyed section. In a correspondence between 2 officers of the Polish II Corps, one letter dated June 3, 1944. Captain Jan Lisowski writes, "The men are uneasy. Some refuse to bivouac near the abbey. They say the stones whisper." His commanding officer replied 2 days later, "Maintain discipline. Do not encourage superstition." Both letters are preserved in the Warsaw Military Archive. From the same year, a Vatican circular warns clergy against spreading rumors of miraculous signs among ruins. The directive emphasizes the importance of moral order amidst devastation. The record's existence indicates that such rumors had already circulated beyond control. Meanwhile, the folklore layer expands. In 1956, a parish priest from Aquino recorded local lullabies sung to children born in the years after the war. One verse contains a refrain, "Sleep, child, sleep, the stone still keeps, the watch of eyes that never weep." The melody, simple and repetitive, follows the rhythm of a funeral chant. The priest added a note sung without variation across 3 villages. Origin unknown. Fact continues. In 1950, an Italian government commission catalogued artifacts salvaged from Cassino. Among 372 items, none match the dimensions listed in the Allied inventory for unidentified decorative carving. The space in the registry where it should appear is blank. A handwritten annotation by the curator reads "only withdrawn" for religious reasons. At the same time, an American veteran, Sergeant Alan Brooks, submitted an affidavit to the Veterans History Project, describing an incident at Cassino involving local children afraid to approach a certain wall. His words, "They said a face was watching from under the stones. I told them it was imagination, but I still remember thinking it looked too clean. No soot, no dirt, like something new." The statement was filed and marked subjective. A different register holds the folklore continuation. The same children grown older were later interviewed in 1971 by ethnographer Claudia Marini. One of them, then a man of 40, recalls a dream he had for several years. "I saw the gargoyle turning its head. It did not look at me. It looked down the road. Every time I woke when it blinked." He claimed the dream stopped only after a visit to the reconstructed abbey where he found no trace of the sculpture. He ends his testimony with, "It must have been taken back." Fact persists in its neutrality. The 1974 restoration log of the abbey notes reconstruction of exterior ornamentation using new molds. No mention is made of any original gargoyle fragment. The corresponding photograph sequence shows the facade blank, smooth, uniform. Yet the archivist in charge of photographing those images, Sister Helena Di Martino, recorded a private note in her diary. In one frame, a shape appeared not seen at sight. When I developed it, the negative showed a face blurred not in the original view. I destroyed it. Her entry ends, "I am not sure I did wrong." The folklore layer aligns. Another voice in the 1957 field recordings, female elderly, states in dialect, "We prayed for the souls of men but none for the stones. Maybe they wait because no one remembers their names." Fact layer interjects. During excavation in 1962, workers unearthed a sealed lead box near the crypt foundations. Inside were fragments of stained glass and a small limestone shard inscribed with a single Latin word, "Vigilat." The find was logged, photographed, and transferred to Rome. Within months, it vanished from the National Museum's storage inventory. The last line in the accession record reads, "Item misplaced during catalog rearrangement." Folklore replies in a letter to the Cassino Folklore Institute. A local mason claimed he saw the same word carved faintly on a new gargoyle head installed in 1965. He wrote, "I did not carve it. None of us did." The institute dismissed it as coincidence. The documentary strands begin to mirror one another, a structure of record and echo. Each factual account gives way to something heard but unmeasured. Each folkloric whisper finds an anchor in stone inscription or date. A 1945 medical report from the British Psychological Corps lists 2 soldiers treated for hallucinatory auditory episodes after the Cassino advance. Diagnosis: combat fatigue. Both cases mention the same description: low moaning repeated at intervals. One soldier's note adds, "Felt like it came from below ground." A year later, in a local church register, Father Bartolomeo della Rosa writes, "Children hear sighs near the northern wall. I sprinkle holy water, but the sound continues." He labels it "vento del peccato," wind of sin. In the 1980s, historian Dr. Alessandra Vitale conducted controlled audio tests near the rebuilt monastery. Her report notes irregular, low-frequency vibration detectable between midnight and 2 a.m. The equipment recorded no external source. She hypothesized underground air pockets. Her assistant later commented in an interview, "It felt as if the mountain was breathing." Back to fact. The 1984 restoration meeting minutes between the Vatican Engineering Council and Italian Ministry of Culture discuss the abbey's acoustics. A section labeled Public Concerns mentions rumors of voices among visitors. The official response, "No evidence." But attached to those minutes is an unsigned memo typed single line. Some silences are evidence. Folklore keeps answering. A woman who served as caretaker at the site in the 1990s recalled dreaming of a face pressed against the stone, its mouth closed, its eyes unblinking. She said, "In the dream it was not frightening. It was waiting for light." The files continue to accumulate in silence, paper on paper. Each record closes with absence missing photo, misplaced object vanished researcher unnamed witness. The words repeat across decades stone eye watch, wait. Fact layer insists on physicality masonry vibration. Mineral residue missing index cards. Folklore insists on remembrance sighing stones, breathing walls, unburied watchfulness. Neither can disprove the other. The documentary trace remains double bureaucratic and human measurable and remembered. The abbey stands again rebuilt from ruins, but the archives still describe something that was never rebuilt, the moment between seeing and being seen. One final record from 2003 closes this sequence. During maintenance work, a restorer cleaning a rain gutter near the north wall discovered a small fragment of limestone fused with modern cement. Embedded on its surface, faint parallel lines resembling the ridges of an eyelid. The piece was catalogued, photographed, and returned to storage. The file's remarks section repeats the same neutral phrase, origin uncertain. And beneath that phrase, handwritten, almost invisible in pencil, a single Latin word appears again, vigilat. No interpretation accompanies it. No commentary follows. Only the record remains. And in the pause between its lines, something that neither history nor memory will close. The reports from Monte Cassino insist on closure. Each sentence concludes as if nothing more could follow. Area secured, no survivors found. Yet in the same hours that these lines were written, voices elsewhere remembered something that did not end. A bell that rang without a tower. A wind that exhaled though the valley was still. The contradiction is constant. The written war dies, but the spoken war refuses. Lieutenant Hale's combat log from May 19, 1944, records the condition of the ruins in the language of precision rubble-assessed movement, none silence total. He writes as though silence were proof of peace, but a concurrent note by Dr. Margaret Lowell, stationed at the same coordinates, describes stone dust falling from no visible source. She offers no interpretation, only the observation that it occurred 3 times in the absence of wind. The next morning, engineers marked the weather as stable barometer, rising humidity low. In the oral archive collected years later, a farmer from the valley below swears that night the air trembled like a heartbeat. He said it came from the mountain, not the sky. The official photograph log shows one negative labeled unidentified carving north wall. The image was later found cracked and unreadable. In the corner of the catalog card, a clerk wrote a single word, returned. No one knows where. The next line in the file is missing. The oral version calls it the night the watcher turned. These fragments dust without wind photos, without subject sentences, without endings, make the rhythm of the record. The Allied Restoration Directive states that all surviving ornamentation was transferred to storage for classification. A Benedictine field report contradicts it. Certain fragments refused removal. Weight abnormal. The equipment logbook confirms a chain breakage during lifting, cause indeterminate. One entry concludes, manual recovery aborted. In a later interview, an unnamed monk recalls hearing the chain snap, as if something resisted. He did not elaborate. The 2 statements remain in different archives, military and ecclesiastical, never cross-referenced. In the Cassino Municipal Register of 1949, engineers reported minor seismic vibration under clear skies. The Geological Bureau replied, no tremor recorded. But the mason who worked on the northern retaining wall told another story. The stones moved without moving, he said, like something inside them turned over. His statement was dismissed as fatigue. Yet the timing matches the engineer's anomaly, exactly 2 minutes past midnight. A Polish officer wrote to his wife in June 1944, describing dripping without rain, air without birds, silence that breathes. The same day, a parish priest preached that stones cannot grieve, only man gives them voice. The juxtaposition is accidental, but perfect. One soldier confessing unease, one priest silencing it. The archive places both letters in separate boxes. They are never meant to meet, but the echo between them remains. Another patrol record from that week mentions figure near rubble, believed civilian vanished upon approach. The next line fades in water damage, half legible. Stone robe eyes. No continuation. The following day, a military typewriter logs no irregularities. The oral testimony preserved by the Folklore Institute decades later states, a face was seen where no face had been. Both cannot be true, yet both are all that exist. The Vatican log for 1950 describes the transport of a limestone fragment weighing 42 kilograms. Description: decorative headpiece. The truck driver's report adds an unaccounted remark. Strange vibration, whispering noise. The mechanical log lists no fault. The oral version gathered later from a nun near Aquino repeats it differently. A truck passed carrying broken saints. One piece looked back. In the register of fatalities 3 years later, the same driver's name appears. Accident on Casino Road. The cause is blank. Inside Vatican box 412B. One carbon copy ends mid-sentence. The sound was, the next page belongs to a different report. Decades later, a field worker reviewing the file notes in pencil. The continuation must have been destroyed. In the oral version, someone remembered the rest. The sound was the breath of the watcher. 2 Polish veterans interviewed separately in 1962 describe the same night from memory. One says, "I saw an eye glisten in the ruin." The other says, "It turned." Their transcripts bear identical timestamps. An editor annotated both with memory unreliable. Official war histories omitted them. But in the same year, a Vatican memorandum repeats the phrase, "reports of nocturnal reflections unverified." The vocabulary of bureaucracy allows no ghosts, only reflections. A British restoration file from 1947 concludes, "all structures stabilized. No artifacts animate or mobile." That same year, a villager's oral tape records, "it sighed under dust." The abbot's ledger mentions evening prayer at 6, bell rang once. The archivist's marginal note dismisses coincidence. The folklorist who reviewed it later added one line in red pencil, "Coincidence is repetition we refuse to read." The files show a gradual drift toward absence. Limestone fragment missing from inventory, says one document. Withdrawn for religious reasons, says another. A local woman's recollection fills the gap. They buried it again with its eyes open. The page following that statement in the Abbey log is torn. The only surviving word at the bottom margin reads, "witnessed." In 1955, an American historian visiting Casino wrote in his notebook that villagers refused to speak of the watcher. A schoolteacher later explained why, "we do not speak because it listens." Neither statement negates the other. Both confirm that silence became part of the story. The archival silence is not an absence, it is a deliberate act, a choice of preservation through omission. A requisition form from 1944 lists missing supplies, camera tripod, field lantern, 3 photographic plates. A faint addition in another hand. The light went out on its own. A restoration memo from 1970 references the same section of the wall reports of stone shifting unsupported by structural data. Folklore answers, "Every time they fix it, the mountain breathes again." The official and the oral are locked in dialogue across half a century. A damaged reel labeled Casino Night Record produces a low rhythmic pulse before the tape tears. The technician wrote mechanical interference. Page 3 of his report ends mid-word, possibly heartbeat. The next document begins with recording damaged. 30 years later, a historian who listened to a restored copy said quietly, "It was rhythm, not human, not machine." He filed no formal comment. In 1990, a Vatican microfilm shows another missing edge. The sentence ends, "He said it was watching still even after." The following frame begins with a new letter unrelated to the war. A 1990s interview with a caretaker finishes the same phrase. "He said it was watching still even after the new roof." The symmetry repeats unprovoked. History's pattern forms itself. Each contradiction cancels nothing. It amplifies. Fact Abbey dedication. Completed 1964. Folklore. The old one sleeps beneath. A geologist's 1970 report lists no ground movement. A villager says the ground sighs. One record calls it stable, the other calls it alive. Both remain in archives equally stamped and dated. When the monastery reopened, visitor number 02817 entered a note in the guest ledger. "Felt eyes in wall." A monk crossed it out with red ink. Later, during an electrical inspection in 1978, a technician wrote that lights flickered when aimed toward the same wall. The log entry was removed for redundancy. The oral record from his family later preserves his words. "The wall breathed." Another inscription from a 1974 memorial speech declares, "The stones of Casino rest in peace." That same night, a veteran on local radio said, "Peace is for men." Stones remember differently. The archive preserves both without comment, 2 halves of a single dissonance. In 1985, a photo exhibition displayed a blurred image labeled North Wall. A faint oval inside it resembled an eye. Caption, "Optical illusion." Comment card. It blinked. 20 years later, during modern restoration, engineers installing new floodlights reported localized power surges without mechanical cause. A monk told a journalist, "The lights do not like that side." The journalist's final diary entry reads, Now I understand why they call it the Watcher. The files end as they began, each side asserting neither winning. The final memorandum of the casino restoration project closes mid-sentence. If these patterns persist, the origin may be. The next page never filed. The box label faded. The silence afterward becomes its own form of record, a gap wider than any explanation. And through every contradiction between ledger and lullaby, between ink and memory, two voices continue circling, one that wrote the world into order, and one that refused to let it stay that way. The Watcher remains between them, unverified and unburied, breathing through the cracks of what the record still calls silence. By the mid-1950s, the archives of Monte Cassino had multiplied. Military ledgers, clerical letters, geological surveys, folklore transcriptions, and photographs no one could authenticate. Each claimed to describe the same coordinates but in different languages of stone, of spirit, of silence. The official reconstruction plans from 1956 illustrate neat outlines of the abbey's future structure corridors, symmetrical walls calculated to resist collapse. The blueprints contain no markings of relics or anomalies. But in the accompanying correspondence between engineers, one marginal note appears in pencil, nearly erased. Avoid excavation beneath northern sector. Local protest persists. No explanation is given. Beneath that line, a faint smudge forms the shape of a cross. A newspaper from Naples that same year published a small column titled La Statua che non dorme, the statue that does not sleep. The journalist claimed that workers had refused to continue after hearing sounds under the wall. The abbey issued an immediate denial, stating all labor proceeding without incident. 2 days later, the journalist retracted the story, but his editor kept the title as filler text for a later issue printed under folklore and superstition. The same phrase would appear again years later on the cover of a local spiritual hymn book, La Pietra che veglia, the stone that watches. A war veteran from the Polish Corps, interviewed in 1958, described a dream that returned each spring. In the dream, he climbed the same hill again, saw the monastery restored, but every window filled with eyes. He said, "They were not human nor statues, only eyes. When I woke, I heard a bell." The interviewer asked if this was memory or invention. He replied, "It is both. In war, what you see, once you see forever." His transcript was filed under psychological trauma. In the same archive, a Benedictine monk's journal from the same year records a single Latin phrase after Vespers vidi oculos sine fine. I saw eyes without end. The records begin to mirror one another, civilian and clerical, soldier and layman, each speaking the same image through different frames. What the historian calls dream, the monk calls revelation. What the priest calls superstition, the witness calls evidence. A report by the Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage from 1960 confirms unusual acoustic reverberations, still measurable during certain liturgical hours. Sound engineers attribute them to architectural resonance. Monks in attendance noted that the tone resembled a breathing rhythm. The report concludes with the phrase, "phenomenon of no concern," but an attached field note in different handwriting adds, "recorded during Mass of the Dead," possibly symbolic. In the same decade, oral testimonies from surrounding villages describe rituals performed after dark. Farmers left small oil lamps at the monastery's base, saying it was for those who do not rest. One old woman told a researcher, "It is not for the dead, it is for the watchers who guard the dead." The researcher asked if she meant angels. She shook her head. "Angels leave at dawn. These stay." He wrote in his notebook, "animistic residue," but underlined it twice. The terminology of faith and folklore had begun to blur. By 1963, restoration of the abbey neared completion. A progress map from the Engineering Bureau lists 3 sealed chambers, 2 on record, 1 unnumbered. The legend simply reads, "Area closed for liturgical reasons." The blue ink bleeds at the edge of the page, forming a faint halo. During the same period, Vatican Radio aired a short program celebrating rebirth of Monte Cassino as symbol of human perseverance. In the transcript, a line near the end, misprinted due to static interference, reads, "And though its stones still breathe, the spirit rests." The announcer corrected himself on air, but the recorded version preserves the slip. Newspapers of the era carried 2 tones. The first, academic and political, praised the abbey as proof of European reconstruction. The second, local and small, carried testimonies of inexplicable silence. A report in Il Messaggero, June 1964, mentions visitors feeling pressure in the chest while standing near the rebuilt northern wall. Medical explanation, altitude anxiety. In the parish bulletin of Cassino that same week, the abbot writes, "Fear is the echo of faith misplaced." Yet a handwritten note at the bottom of the parish copy, signed only L, says, "I heard it breathe again." The second layer deepens through personal correspondence. In a letter to his brother dated August 1964, a U.S. veteran named Harold Whitby, now a historian, describes returning to the site. He wrote, The abbey shines white as new bone, but the air feels older than before. I stood near the wall and could hear a pulse. Maybe it was my own. His letter was never published but found decades later in the War College archive. In the same folder rests an anonymous Italian postcard with no return address stamped Cassino 1964. We have rebuilt what watches us. Meanwhile, field ethnographers catalogued a new kind of local hymn sung not in churches but during planting season. The lyrics translated roughly to, "Do not wake the watcher, for it never slept." The melody repeated in triplets, low and unresolving. Musicologists analyzing the recording described it as a chant, constructed on minor intervals resembling Gregorian lament, but lacking resolution. They noted that it always ended on the same word, Ritorna returns. That same word appears in a forgotten page of the abbey's administrative minutes, where a monk recorded the transfer of debris to a side crypt. Objects of uncertain sanctity reinterred. In Latin margin notes, another hand added, et vigilat. It watches. Beneath that written faintly, non reddit. It does not return. The phrase appears to contradict itself within two lines, as though written by two different minds. During the late 1960s, as the world outside turned to new wars, the Cassino stories began to fade from public discourse. Scholars moved on to other ruins, other symbols. Yet within the abbey, the reports persisted in small details, candles extinguishing themselves, echoes of single notes long after service ended, water condensation forming shapes like eyes on the stone. None of it warranted documentation. All of it entered private journals. A 1972 maintenance log includes the note, "Recurring moisture on internal surfaces, source unknown. Chemical analysis found mineral composition inconsistent with rainfall." The supervising engineer left a comment, "Condensation of undetermined cause, possibly spiritual in nature, humorous remark." The archivist who later read the file underlined that phrase and wrote humorous to whom, the folkloric threads, though quieter, never ceased. Pilgrims began to leave offerings at the foot of the northern wall, coins, feathers, folded prayers. None of these were officially sanctioned. One monk assigned to clear them away began collecting the papers privately. In his memoir published posthumously, he describes reading them at night. Many contained the same sentence, "Watch over us as we watched you." He writes, "They wrote as if speaking to something real. The interplay of faith and evidence tightens until neither can be distinguished. A scientific survey detects irregular magnetism near the rebuilt altar. A journalist calls it relic interference. A monk calls it presence. A visitor faints. The next day's newspaper attributes it to heat. The abbey remains open." In 1978, an Italian newspaper ran a human interest piece titled "The Gargoyle's Shadow," interviewing residents who still avoided the abbey after dark. One said, "It's not fear. It's respect. You don't stare at something that already sees you." The piece concluded with the line, "Faith is sometimes an act of looking back." 2 weeks later, lightning struck the monastery's outer wall. Damage was minimal. A Vatican statement described it as natural weather occurrence. Local rumor called it the Watcher's Acknowledgement. Into the 1980s, visitors recorded dreams in guest books. A voice calling from stone, a bell that rings under the floor, a shape in the wall that breathes with me. The curators stopped providing blank comment pages. Yet the motif of watchfulness remained coded even in official tours. Guides described the abbey as a living testament. Tourists whispered that the phrase was literal. By the early 1990s, the boundaries between archive and legend had collapsed entirely. Academic papers referred to psychosomatic resonance phenomena, while local homilies began incorporating the word vigilare, to watch, as a metaphor for moral consciousness. Historians cited soldiers' dreams. Priests cited engineers' notes. Every reflection began to mirror the other until both sides became one text, a faith written in factual language and a fact recited as prayer. At the end of the century, during a centennial commemoration, a choir performed a new piece titled "Stone Vigil." Its lyrics were drawn entirely from archival fragments. Among the ruins, something still watched us. It had the face of stone, but the eyes seemed wet. The audience believed it was poetry. The choir director later admitted it was documentary transcription. Today, the archives list hundreds of entries under Unexplained Phenomena Monte Cassino. Each file is cross-referenced to an opposing source, scientific beside spiritual report, beside recollection. The pattern is deliberate, symmetrical. Every fact is mirrored by faith, every belief anchored by evidence. The Watcher exists not as myth or artifact, but as reflection between the two. In the final document of the 20th century Cassino archive, an anonymous cataloger writes a single line, "When truth looks long enough into faith, it sees itself." Beneath it, another handwriting answers, and the Watcher blinks. The final section of the Cassino archive begins where the records stop speaking. Every document ends with a similar absence: pages torn, margins burned, signatures missing. The silences align like coordinates. They form their own map, drawn not in ink, but in erasure. Between those missing lines lies the only continuity left the watcher that neither record nor belief could bury. The historian writes, "No further correspondence exists." The monk writes, "No more words were needed." The villager says, "After that night, it stopped moving." But all three are describing the same thing: the moment when the silence itself became the story. The last military report from May 1944 concludes, "All positions stabilized, noise minimal." Decades later, a reconstruction engineer wrote in his diary, "We have restored the walls, but not the quiet." In another note found beside it, written in the same hand but years apart, the sentence repeats, "We have restored the quiet, but not the walls." The paper had been folded and unfolded until the fibers split, as if the page had been breathing. When the abbey reopened in 1964, the Vatican declared it reborn from ruin. A small ceremony was held at dusk. Photographs showed dignitaries smiling beneath scaffolds, their shadows long across the courtyard. No bell was scheduled to ring, yet one did 3 times, slow and even. The official statement the next day attributes the sound to wind pressure on a loose clapper. The sound technician's log, however, notes bell system disconnected. The line below is empty. The next page begins a new section on lighting. The oral accounts remember it differently. "We stood in the courtyard," says an elderly monk in a 1980 recording, "and the air moved through us as if the stones exhaled. Then the bell rang low and alone. Nobody touched it." Another monk, younger, interviewed decades later, describes standing beside that same bell years after. "It never moved again," he says, "but when the wind shifts, you can still hear it ring inside your head." He touches his temple and smiles. Not outside, inside. The bell becomes the echo motif, returning each generation, each retelling. In the hook, it was the breath of stone. In the middle, the sigh through the mountain. Here, at the end, it is silence given rhythm. The gap between sound and memory collapses into one sustained note that only those who listen for it can hear. During a night shift in 1979, a security guard at the Abbey recorded in his logbook, "Heard tone from Northern Hall. Believed it to be electrical hum. Maintenance found no malfunction." The supervisor annotated the report with one word: perception. In 1985, a journalist staying overnight wrote in her notebook, "The silence here has structure. It folds." She never published her article, but her tape recorder captured 12 seconds of low resonance between her breathing. When analyzed later, the frequency matched the bell at Monte Cassino minus the bell itself. The monastery today remains quiet, but not empty. Visitors walk its corridors as though through an unspoken pact with the stones. They lower their voices, slow. Their steps look up at ceilings rebuilt to resemble perfection. The northern wall, repaired and painted over, bears no inscription. Yet anyone standing before it long enough reports the same unease, the sense of being measured by something that endures without needing to see. The Abbey's archive preserves a final testimony from 1999, a letter written by a caretaker to the curator of the Central Folklore Institute. "The tourists say they feel watched," he writes, "but they mistake the direction. It is not the wall that looks. It is the silence." His words were never acknowledged by the Institute. The file was stamped "Received" and placed in Box 19, where it remains unopened. Somewhere between faith and architecture, an echo continues its pulse. Each factual entry repeats with a shadow version in the oral accounts, one naming, one remembering. Every confirmed record has an answering whisper. It is the rhythm of the watcher, the alternation of paper and breath. When archivists list the final casino entry, they leave a single empty line before the closing signature. The line is not decorative. It is space for the sound that cannot be written. The motif of watchfulness vigilate returns like a tolling word. It is found carved beneath plaster, traced in fading ink, sung in lullabies. The same Latin appears on the limestone fragment sealed in 1962, on the blueprint margins of 1956, and on a child's drawing donated anonymously in 1974. The drawing shows a simple outline of the abbey and a single eye above it, weeping a line that becomes a bell cord. On the back, the child wrote, "He dreams awake." Every motif now folds into another. The bell becomes the breath. The breath becomes the watcher. The watcher becomes the word. They reflect until no single version holds precedence. The historian can document the vibration, the believer can name the presence, but both circle the same silence that neither can cross. In the Vatican archive, one final sheet lies separate from the others. It is not typed, but handwritten in Latin, "Nullus amplius scripsit sed campana respondit." No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. The handwriting matches no known record keeper. Ink analysis dates it to the early 1970s. No official translation appears in the file. Instead, a yellow slip covers it with the word unverified. Beneath that paper, faint through the fibers, the phrase remains visible. A century after the battle, the abbey stands immaculate on its mountain, its white walls gleaming under the Italian sun. Tourists photograph it as a symbol of endurance. Guides recite statistics of reconstruction: 90 million bricks, 12 tons of marble, 60 years of restoration. None mention the missing stones beneath. None mention the sound still trapped in the air. But on nights when fog folds around the hill, the silence thickens, and those who linger swear they feel the ground pulse. Once, then stop, as if the mountain itself had exhaled. One archaeologist working a late survey in 2005 described a phenomenon he could not measure. "I felt a pressure in my chest," he said, like someone nearby was taking a deep breath. His instruments recorded nothing. His field note ends with a line not typical of scientific documentation. The air trembles as if remembering sound. It was his last entry before retirement. At the Central Folklore Institute, the archivists who process the casino materials have adopted an unofficial practice. When they file the last page of any testimony, they leave the top line blank, a space to honor what cannot be named. They call it the listening line. In their catalog, every such file carries the annotation status continuing. If the watcher ever had a form, it no longer requires one. It has diffused into repetition the ringing without bell, the breathing without lungs, the presence without face. In academic papers, it becomes echo persistence. In homilies, it becomes eternal vigilance. In the memories of the locals, it becomes something simpler. The gargoyle still waits, and in the archive language, it remains unresolved. When the last oral history session was conducted in 2010, the interviewer asked an elderly survivor what he remembered of the battle. The man, nearly blind, smiled faintly. "I remember the noise stopping," he said. "Then I heard it breathe." The tape ran out before he finished the sentence. Only static follows soft, rhythmic, distant, until the recording clicks to silence. That is where the record ends. But the silence that follows is not empty. It is deliberate. It is the sound of 1,000 unwritten pages closing at once. Somewhere in the stillness between archive and echo, the watcher remains awake. No one writes anymore. But the bell keeps answering. The surviving documents of Monte Cassino were last consolidated in 2017 under a digital preservation initiative titled Project Vigilat. The files occupy 37 folders across 3 institutions: the Vatican Archive in Rome, the Imperial War Museum in London, and the Central Folklore Institute in Naples. Each repository keeps its own classification system, yet all end the same way, with gaps that refuse closure. No one has produced a full chronology of how the records scattered or who first began to join them. The work remains divided among archivists who have never met, separated by geography, but united by the same incompleteness. The earliest artifact, the torn field notebook from May 1944, remains in a sealed case within the War Museum's temperature-controlled vault. The ink, now faint gray, still reads, "Among the ruins, something still watched us. It had the face of stone, but the eyes seemed wet. The paper has darkened along the margins where heat once reached it. Every 5 years, the museum performs humidity tests. None of them explain the slight mineral residue that continues to form at the crease of the page, a dust fine enough to shimmer under light. The conservation report calls it limestone particulate from external exposure. The curator calls it memory that refuses containment. At the Vatican, box 412B has grown heavier, though no one can explain why. Its contents have been catalogued and recatalogued, but each weighing yields a different number. The archivist assigned to it describes hearing a resonance when the lid closes. No recording captures the sound. Within that box lie the unsorted letters of Monsignor Rinaldi, the unverified note in Latin. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering, and a broken wax seal, whose symbol no longer matches any ecclesiastical sigil. The church makes no comment on the anomaly. The annotation in the master register, typed in small italic letters, reads simply, "Filed among other uncertainties." The Central Folklore Institute preserves what remains of the Voices reel-to-reel tapes, unspooled and digitized, labeled Casino Night Record and Voices After the War. The first contains static, interrupted by faint rhythmic pulses. The second holds fragments of Italian phrases, half songs, half sighs. Linguists call them artifacts of compression. Acousticians describe them as interference. But the technicians who handle the reels use another word entirely. They call it breathing. Each layer of preservation distances the listener further from the event and closer to reflection. What began as an investigation into a fragment of stone has become a study in continuity of how belief shapes the way silence survives. The abbey itself stands now in perfection. Its gardens restored, its walls white as bleached bone. Tourists walk through without knowing that beneath their steps lie rooms still sealed since 1944. The guides mention art heritage resilience. None mention the Watcher. Yet local residents still avoid the northern path after dusk. They say the air is heavier there. They say the quiet hums. In 2021, a restoration drone scanning the structure's surface for microfractures detected an unusual vibration localized in a single area, exactly where the unrecorded chamber was marked on the 1956 blueprint. The reading lasted 6 seconds and ceased. Engineers blamed battery error, but the data remained a small repetitive oscillation too low for human hearing, but measurable. Its frequency matched the bell of Monte Cassino. The report concluded, instrument drift, no anomaly detected. The notation beneath it, handwritten by the analyst, says, or maybe the anomaly is us. From time to time, scholars return to the legend of the gargoyle that would not sleep. They write papers on cultural trauma memory architecture and spiritual residue. Yet their conclusions circle the same paradox that every attempt to rationalize the story produces more uncertainty. The gargoyle becomes metaphor, then metaphor becomes evidence again. The argument folds back on itself, mirroring the abbey's reconstruction. Each restoration built atop fragments of the last. One professor summarized it best. Cassino is the sound of history breathing through architecture. What endures after all the theories and footnotes is the echo. Not the object, not the myth, but the act of hearing what no longer makes sound. Visitors describe it differently, a vibration, a ringing, a sudden pressure in the chest. But the phrase most often written in guest books is still the same. I felt something answer. The final registered entry in the Folklore Institute's logbook is dated 2019. It lists an interview with a 90-year-old woman daughter of one of the original oral witnesses. She speaks slowly, her words almost drowned by the whir of the recorder. My mother used to say the bell was not for the dead. She whispers it was for the living, to remind them not to forget how silence sounds. When asked what she believes remained in the monastery after the war, she smiles. Nothing, she says, but nothing that remembers itself. In the end, the Watcher is less a creature than a continuity, something that endures by being retold, reshaped, reinterpreted. It lives in the repetition of the word vigilat across centuries of handwriting. It lives in the breath caught between one testimony and another. It lives in the spaces left blank by those who refused to explain. The silence that once separated fact from folklore has become the thread that binds them. When historians read the Cassino files now, they find that the documents themselves begin to mirror the language of faith. The words missing, lost, unverified recur like prayers. Each absence becomes a kind of affirmation. Each uncertainty a new point of contact between what is known and what resists knowing. The abbey no longer watches over its valley. The valley watches over the abbey. The archive itself has become the Watcher, its pages open eyes that never close. And in this reversal, the meaning of all those records begins to invert. Perhaps the Watcher was never a thing of stone, but the gaze of history itself, endless, patient, waiting for us to remember what we tried to bury under restoration, reason, and progress. Perhaps the silence that haunts Monte Cassino is not echoing from the ruins outward, but from us inward. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe we did. Because every reconstruction, every explanation, every act of documentation is also an act of forgetting, replacing the living pulse of mystery with the stillness of paper. The Watcher in that sense has always been what remains awake after our attention fades. It waits in the quiet spaces we abandon, in the moments between questions, in the breath that follows the last line of a report. When the bell at Cassino last rang on its own, if it ever truly did, no one wrote it down. But even now, in the absence of sound, its resonance remains measurable in the pause before the next word, in the silence that insists on being heard. It is the echo of vigilance, the lesson of endurance, the proof that even when history stops recording, memory continues to listen. You have just heard another record from Shadow Stories, a file that never truly closes. If you wish to hear what still listens back, subscribe and stay with the silence.